Great. So thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to get started with our name, pronouns, hub or organization, and then a quick icebreaker. And I'll read a couple off. So the icebreaker is, what do you do to re-energize during the workday? And I will get us started. Maria Mendoza, she, her, ella pronouns. And I think I really like just going out and getting a quick walk in during the day, whether it's rainy or sunny out. I feel like a good walk will just get me going, clear my head for a second in between meetings, and just sometimes exactly what I needed. So that's mine. Let's see if anyone else. Begonia, early learning Washington County, and paddling with a Hawaiian outrigger in the river. Thanks, Begonia. Cass, for parent education and parent leadership coordinator. I like to go for walks as well. Thanks, Cass. Kaylee, Crystal, Dolly Parton Imagination Library, and walking my pug, Minerva. Oh, that's so cute. I would love pugs. I will read one more if we have one come in. Rachel Elliott, she, her, Delk, Head Start Collaboration Specialist. I try to do a lunchtime workout. Runner Zumba. Way to go, Rachel. All right. I think I'm going to hand it over to Nancy, who's going to get us going with our agenda.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Hout, Early Learning Hub Coordinator, and we're going to get started today with the new Oregon team from the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. So I'll hand it over to Lori and Kaylee.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Maria. Alrighty, so I'm going to attempt again to share my screen. We've tried it one time and it worked quite well. So let me just make sure I've got my display options. Let's see. Alrighty. Will someone confirm that that is showing up for you?
Yeah, you can see it.
Wonderful, thank you. So we are so grateful to be here today to talk a little bit about Imagination Library. We're going to talk about the introduction of a state team, introduce ourselves, do a little Imagination Library 101. I know some of you are already very familiar, but others may not be. We'll do a high-level overview of where we are, both in the United States and in Oregon specifically. And then we'll talk about collaboration opportunities with the hubs. And we'll have a little time for questions and answers. If you have a question while one of us is speaking, if it's an easy, brief question, feel free to ask it or put it in the chat. We'll address the questions we can easily answer. If something is very specific to your region, that might be something that you can take offline and email Kaylee or myself. Kaylee will put our contact information in the chat, and you'll also see it on one of our slides. So one of the very exciting milestones for Dolly Parton Imagination Library in Oregon is that we now have a state team of two, Kaylee and myself, that we started just over 3 months ago. I am the state director. My contact information is available on this slide. I formerly worked with the nonprofit literacy organization Smart Reading. Maybe some of you know of it, but that background in early literacy really, really made me passionate about books and reading and making sure kids have access to books. So this opportunity with Imagination Library was a natural next step. Kaylee.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be talking with everyone today. Thank you so much for your time. My name's Kaylee Crystal. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Imagination Library, and I'm super thrilled to be here. I also come from a nonprofit early literacy background. I was recently with Stand for Children, so did a lot of advocacy and policy work, helped with the Early Literacy Success Initiative, and helped implement that last year as well. So I've been really focused on the K-3 kiddos with early literacy. So super excited to be focusing on birth to 5, starting at the very beginning. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Next slide. So as Lori said, I'm sure a lot of you probably already know what the program is, but I'm just going to give a brief overview of what the Imagination Library is all about. So the Imagination Library is a book gifting program that mails children books each month from birth to their 5th birthday, and it's completely free of cost to the child and their family. It was established in 1995, so we'll be celebrating 30 years next year, which is so exciting. And more information will come on how we're going to be celebrating that. So the Imagination Library is the flagship program of the Dollywood Foundation. So it's a grassroots community-based book gifting program. Right now we are mailing over 3 million books a month to children. And this is all throughout 5 different countries: Australia, Canada, Ireland, United Kingdom, and of course the US. In total, we have gifted 250 million books throughout the almost 30 years of its existence, which is incredible. And the Dolly Parton Imagination Library has also been a recipient of the Best Practices Award from the US Library of Congress. So Dolly got to come out and receive this honor, and she donated the 100th millionth book, the book, oh my goodness, words today, The Coat of Many Colors, and she got to read it to the kiddos that attended, and it was a really lovely event. A lot of the staff got to go. Next slide. So how the Imagination Library works is that it's a 2-part system. So the Dollywood Foundation is one part of it, but what really makes this program work is with the help of our local program partners. So our local program partner is a 501c3 nonprofit that will be the distributor of purchasing books and postage and distributing those to their communities. So we have 56 local program partners throughout the state of Oregon, and they're all quite lovely. I know I saw one of them on the call with us. Hello, Michelle. So we work in tandem with our local program partners to help get books out to all the kiddos from birth to 5 and their respective communities. Next slide. So just a brief overview about the books that we're sending out, because we're a book gifting program, have to talk about the books. So our books are selected from a Blue Ribbon Selection Committee. So they meet once a year to go through books sent from Penguin Publishing House. Penguin Random House is our exclusive publisher. So the books are only from Penguin. So they go through, they spend a couple days, they read every single book out loud to get the full experience. And then they start selecting titles for each age group. And each age group is based on when a child was born. So you see group 1 in the image here is talking about children in 2024, and group 6 being children that were born in 2019. Each age group has 2 of the Spanish-English bilingual options in each age group. So each child right now will receive 2 English-Spanish bilingual books each year. And also the other thing is that a lot of the paperback books or the soft cover books has reading tips in the inside of the book where a guardian caregiver that's reading to the child can refer to and have tips on how to have the best experience in reading to the child. And also a fun tidbit is that we also have Braille options for the visually impaired. So we partnered with American Printing House to provide these Braille options. You have to sign up with American Printing House. It's not available on the website, but it's still free of charge to the families. They get 6 books per year versus the 12, but it will have a Braille overlay on each page. So it's really quite special. And they also have audio options. Each book, every welcome book is the little engine that could. It's Dolly's favorite book. She wanted to make sure every child, even if they got 1 month, even if it was like their 4th year, 11th month, they will get the little engine that could. She really loved the motto, like, I think I can, I think you can, and to dream big. And so it really sets the tone for the program. And then the graduation book is Look Out Kindergarten, because by the time they're entering their 5th birthday, kindergarten is on the horizon, and we're wanting to set them up with that excitement into that next chapter. Next slide.
Thank you for that, Kaylee.
Yeah.
Is my audio still working okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I know it can lag sometimes if I'm not speaking. So you know a little bit more maybe than you did if you're not already familiar. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about the overview in the United States. So right now, 1 in 7 kids in the United States, 5 and under, 5th birthday month and under, are receiving books from Imagination Library. This map highlights the coverage. I know that everyone's eyes are shifting to the upper left-hand side of the screen of the view of the United States looking at Oregon. And gosh, that looks pretty good, pretty well covered. And it's actually, the map is a little behind the times. We've actually got more coverage than this depicts. But we'll talk about that in a moment. 16% of kids in the United States, that's the 1 in 7, are receiving books. There are gaps, as you can see, but we're working actively as an organization to fill those gaps. Over 3 million children in the US receive books. It's just an incredible achievement, and it's so exciting that communities across the United States can be part of this. So shifting to Oregon, a little bit about the roles that Kaylee and I have. My role as state director is overarchingly to achieve and maintain statewide coverage, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Build awareness about Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, present to prospective funders, prospective partners, also prospective advisory board candidates, respond to media inquiries, and to, as I mentioned, we're looking to build an advisory board to convene that group when we have the opportunity to assemble the right folks. Kaylee, as community engagement coordinator, is focused on educating the community on the program and to find new local program partners to help achieve that statewide coverage and maintain it. Her role also includes supporting and collaborating with our local program partners and helping them grow their program enrollment. Finally, strategizing with the partners with everything from marketing to fundraising to different campaigns and initiatives to ensure that they are able to successfully continue what they have started in their communities. Haley and I started on July 29th of this year. The month of August was very much involved with just getting to learn our roles and about the Imagination Library. In August, we created a 3-month plan. We looked at September as an opportunity to begin a statewide listening tour to meet with our local program partners. Kaylee mentioned there are 56 of them across the state. Find coverage for the metro counties, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington, which only at the time we started had partial coverage. And then to seek additional partnerships or expand existing partnerships in Deschutes and Douglas County counties, which were also counties where we only had partial coverage. In October, we had planned to begin some regular informational sessions for our local program partners, increase visibility and awareness through media and presentations, and support growing enrollment efforts, bringing us to November, where we are preparing for the new legislative session, focusing on strategies to enroll vulnerable populations of children, and to begin planning for the year ahead. And where we stand right now is pretty exciting. We have a new partner for Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington that will become operational in the near future. That means all children, all families can enroll their children in those 3 counties in the near future. We also had Deschutes County come on board with Bend and Redmond and Sisters through an existing partnership with our local program partner, who is also a hub. So we're very, very grateful that Deschutes expanded, and now all zip codes in Deschutes County are able to enroll their children. Our only holdout is Douglas County. We have 2 zip codes remaining in Douglas County, and they are the only 2 zip codes in the whole state that aren't operational or about to be operational.
Marty, if I could just interrupt for just a minute, I'm seeing a question in the chat, and I'm also wanting to give a time check. We've
Yes.
got, gosh, about 7 minutes left. It went really fast, and I want to make sure that hub directors have a moment to ask questions and not be too
Absolutely.
rushed at that.
Absolutely. What is the question in the chat?
The question was referring to the new partner for Clackamas, Multnomah, I think in Washington County.
Yes.
And the question was, who is that partner? And then because in Clackamas County, we have heard nothing. So I'm wondering if we can just start that with the question and answer time.
Let's hold that question really quickly, because I just do want to share that we are wrapping up our listening tour. Our info sessions are beginning this month, and our first press release is coming out this month as well. And highlight that of the almost 216,000 eligible kids in Oregon, we are already at almost 27% enrollment. The map here shows Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington, still in the yellow, still partial coverage, but our new partner will become operational soon. I wanted to talk a little bit about hubs partnering with Imagination Library. And we actually have local program partners that are also hubs listed here. Specifically, right now, before we achieve full statewide coverage, there is a resource linked here, and Kaylee can also put that in the chat, or we can email it to you later to share amongst your hubs, where you can find out who the local program partners are in your region, asking them how you can collaborate would be wonderful, and supporting their enrollment efforts would also be amazing. Once we achieve full statewide coverage, it will be possible for the hubs as an organization to support enrollment efforts across the state without exceptions, which is incredibly exciting for us to consider. You'll also gain access to the Partner Success Kit, which will be a variety of templates, assets, basically a variety of enrollment and media tools that will help highlight the opportunity for families, and more collaboration opportunities will surface. Dolly says you can never get enough books into the hands of enough children, and I couldn't agree more. And to answer the first question, the partner in the Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties is United Way of Columbia Willamette.
And they'll be announcing their arrival soon. We're currently onboarding with them, which is why no one has heard of the news yet. We're collaborating that. So like we wanted to share that news with you guys to let you know that it is coming. But they will be announcing themselves very, very shortly.
So now that you know, do keep it under your hat until their official announcement, if you don't mind.
We've got a few minutes left. Are there any other questions for the Oregon team?
We welcome your questions if you want to send them by email specific to your community. We are so grateful today to all of you, and thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. It's going to be an amazing time.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Kaylee. Thanks for your time. All right. Let's pass it on to our next group. We've got Katrina Miller and the ORIMHA team talking about the Early Childhood Suspension and Expulsion Prevention Program, ESEP. I know you've got a lot to share. And in addition to a presentation, we're also going to have some time for breakout rooms and some engagement. So the next hour is really going to be devoted to this. And I hope folks will ask questions as they come about. And Katrina, I'm just going to pass it along to you.
Thanks, Nancy. It is really great to be here with this group. We've been talking about scheduling this for a while, and this is when we could make it work. So I'm delighted to be here, and I know the rest of the team working on suspension and expulsion is also really grateful. So let me share my screen and get us going. We have a number of us here that will share information. So we're going to do just brief introductions, talk about a bunch of frequently asked questions, talk a little tiny bit about mental health consultation, program branding. We have a poll on a new name for the program, and then the breakout groups and discussion. So just briefly, if you are part of the DELC team or the ORIMHA team who is working on suspension and expulsion, raise your Zoom hand, whether you're on this list or not. I didn't manage to get everybody on here, but that will just pop everybody up to the top so that you can see all of us. There's quite a team working on this. And I am noticing a few people, Norma and Hannah and Liz, who aren't raising their hands, but they are also involved in this work. All right, so that's what we're going to do for introductions for the sake of time, but we are happy to have additional conversation another time. This is also, some of you may have seen this before, but this is the list of regional service providers. I'm not going to go through the whole list again because of time, but you have this list in the slides. It's also on the DELC website. Some hubs are also regional service providers. They are, of course, separate grants, separate work, but sometimes the same agency. Okay. So what is the Early Childhood Suspension and Expulsion Prevention Program? And pretty soon, oh, Erin, I see your hand is up. Oh, you just didn't take it down. Okay. So what is this program that hopefully soon will have a new name? Well, the program it's a program designed to increase supports that are available to educators and early learning programs. This is not what a lot of people think of when they hear the name Early Childhood Suspension and Expulsion Prevention Program. There has been a lot of fear, and understandably so, about what this legislation means, what this program means for providers who are doing a lot of hard work. So the intent really is to increase supports. And the second bullet point, it's a specific focus. Now, we don't want it to be the only focus, but a specific focus on providing support when an educator or program is dealing with challenging situations with children. We have been hearing programs loud and clear that there are challenges that they're experiencing, and we are building this program with that in mind. And so it's creating a simple way that providers will be able to ask for support. It's mobilizing the existing technical assistance system. It's adding a new statewide support, which is infant and early childhood mental health consultation. And it's enhancing coordination between all of the different organizations that provide support to educators and programs. So we have a bunch of frequently asked questions to share with you. And actually, we have the question, but we also have answers to the question. But the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia Gardner from the Child Care Licensing Division to share a little bit about how DELC and CCLD are thinking about enforcement of the prohibition. Alicia.
Thanks, Katrina. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all here. As Katrina said, I'm Alicia. I am the Child Care Licensing Division Director. And I'm here to talk to you about the enforcement because we're getting a lot of questions and, quite frankly, concerns, particularly from family child care providers and center directors related to how exactly we're going to enforce a prohibition on suspension and expulsion. And so we have thought through this rather early on in the process. You know, the Senate Bill 236, which does prohibit suspension and expulsion, doesn't actually take effect until 2026. So we've had the opportunity to think through this kind of on a preliminary scale. And the good news is that if you're familiar with the licensing structure, you will see that the enforcement of a suspension or expulsion is going to fit in very similarly with a lot of our other health and safety rules. So as you can see here on the slide, we have like a little triangle on the left. This is similar to how we approach what we call progressive enforcement in the child care licensing system. At the base of the pyramid, you can see this is the majority of CCLD's work, where we're going into facilities, we're inspecting them, we're providing technical assistance and education. We may cite with a letter of non-compliance, but we assure corrective action by following up, making sure the programs understand the areas of non-compliance and the programs fix, and they all stay at the base of the pyramid. If you move up the pyramid, you can see very similar to like a lot of behavior models or other kinds of early learning pyramids that are out there. We've got intermediate sanctions, and this is where programs that may have more issues with staying in compliance or more serious higher level issues, we may approach those programs with civil penalties, what's called an emergency condition. So these are kind of things that don't close the program down, but are intended to get the program back down to the base where they can be in compliance, but taking a stronger enforcement approach. At the top of the pyramid there, you can see CCLD also has what's called our terminal sanctions process. And this is where we often find programs who have engaged in abuse or neglect or very concerning practices that are harmful to children time and time again, where we have decided that as a state, this program is no longer safe to operate. I'm showing you all this because I think it's important to have like the context and the framing of how CCLD approaches enforcement as a whole, so you can understand where suspension and expulsion fits. On the right-hand side of the slide, I have put in the language for serious violation. This is rule language, and so whenever we have something that's a serious violation, we have to look to our rule to understand what that means. When I look at what a violation of suspension and expulsion would be in the future, should we have rules on this in the future? A violation, a singular violation of suspension and expulsion is not going to fit into the serious violation definition. What that means for CCLD staff and for providers is that we will be able to address this with technical assistance, and we don't have to begin at a higher level intervention or sanction, right? So we can start with educating the providers and understanding the root causes of what's concerned, and hopefully connect them to the resources so that they can be more successful in the future in helping support the children in their care. Next slide. Do I have 2 slides? Yes, okay. So the other thing to note for you all is that currently Senate Bill 236 does not have authority explicitly listed for CCLD to enforce the prohibition. So what this means is that right now, without a statutory amendment to that bill, the requirements for the prohibition for suspension expulsion are going to remain symbolic and unenforced. CCLD has a legislative concept in the works to be able to fix this and point the bill to the statutes that CCLD has that allow us at CCLD to enforce the rules with civil penalties, with investigations, with the authorities given it to us by the legislature to run a licensing system. So that's what I have for you today. But what I've been telling a lot of folks throughout this journey in implementation and thinking about what implementation is going to look like is that we are actually very focused on ensuring that we come with a supportive lens first to understand when a child care provider is struggling or when they have had a rule violation of suspension expulsion, that we look to support first. We look to provide education first, and we look to connect them to the resources before taking any other additional action.
Surprise, Alicia, you have one more slide.
Oh, thank you. Remaining administrative work. So I think I might have spoke to this a little bit, but what we're also hoping to do in the rulemaking process, we receive a lot of questions around what suspension expulsion is or isn't, particularly as it relates to parent behavior. Many times when I've spoken to providers about this issue, they say things to me like, what happens if a parent doesn't pay me and I have to end care? Does that mean, is that counting as a suspension expulsion? Because I want to get paid, right? And another one is, what happens if a parent's not cooperating when I'm trying to support their child, but they're not holding up their end of what I'm asking them to do? And so we know that we need to make rules around these topics to help really refine and define what suspension expulsion is and what it isn't. And then we also have in the legislative concept, we have put forward the ability to allow CCLD to make specific exceptions for protecting the health and safety of children in care when there is a suspension or expulsion, but done through the eyes of expertise, particularly when working with specialists, law enforcement, ODHS caseworkers. When we have abuse and neglect involved, sometimes it is determined that it is for the safety of not only the children in care, but that child who may be a perpetrator of abuse themselves to not be in a care environment. And so we at CCLD feel like we need the ability to allow that provider to work with those specialists or those other law enforcement officers or caseworkers to do what's best for those children in all circumstances when that tragic situation occurs. So we're hoping to address this all through rulemaking, and that would be after the 2025 legislative session.
Yeah. Thank you, Alicia. A couple questions in the chat. You're talking about the 2025 long legislative session, right? And then
That's right.
Yeah, the rules, statutes will be in place by July 2026. And do we anticipate that the legislature is supportive of this amendment?
Yeah, so what I can tell you is that we had a requirement at DELC to put forward a legislative report on how we propose to enforce the suspension and expulsion prohibition. And all of this information that you've received today is found in that report, and the legislature has had that report since earlier this year. I think it might have been the beginning of this year.
January?
And so we've put forward our intent very early, and we are having conversations related to this intent, and it was submitted in a legislative report. So I think it was the intent of the legislature to have the enforcement within CCLD. So now I think we're regarding this as a bit of a technical fix in order to ensure that we actually have the right statutory authority to enforce the ban as originally intended.
Thank you, Alicia.
Absolutely.
So that's lots of great information to absorb, and we'll have a chance to you'll have a chance to ask some questions when we get to the breakout groups. Thank you, John. John just dropped the link to that legislative report that Alicia mentioned. The next few slides, I'm going to talk through some other frequently asked questions. Some of these may overlap slightly with what Alicia shared. These are slides that we put together and shared at a recent provider information session. So this is information that has been shared directly with childcare programs and providers, and language around it that may be helpful for you as you interact with programs and providers. So, as Alicia said, what will happen if a child's parent or family member is abusive or unsafe toward educators, if the parent's behavior is the concern? So the focus of the program is providing support to educators. So it's not about requiring educators to submit to unkind, disrespectful behavior from parents. And the focus is on preventing suspension and expulsion based on the child's behaviors, the child's disability, or other perceived needs. What happens if the parent or family does not pay their bill? Well, again, the goal of the program is to provide support so that providers are able to earn a living and provide support to children and families. It's not intended to require providers to provide care for free or when they can't be paid. And educators will be allowed to unenroll a child without it being considered as an expulsion if it's due to non-payment. What will happen if an educator wants to ask for support, but the parent or family does not agree? Well, again, the goal of the program is to provide support to educators. An educator can request support at any time, regardless of any time that they feel the need for support. There are some services that require parental consent, and so those will be off the table or potentially off the table. But there are other services that will be available without parental consent, without parental involvement, that really work on supporting the educator. So another piece of this is if an educator isn't sure how to approach the family to get the family on board, they can submit a request for support, and then somebody will help them determine what's the right strategy for how to engage the family in conversation, how to get the family on board. There are going to be some times where families have the right to decline, and that's just their right as parents, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that an educator is just out of luck. They can still request support. So what happens if a new child comes to an early learning program and the educator or program doesn't think they can support the child? So this is a great question. And what we want to say is anytime that an early learning program or an educator is worried that they cannot support a child, they should submit a request to the Warm Line. And it is okay to start to submit a request to the Warm Line, even if the child hasn't yet started at the program. So if there's a family that comes to visit, there's a child that has perhaps a medical need, or there's a perceived behavior, submit a report. Not a report, a request for support. And then those services can get started right away to help support the child to be successful, to help the educator be successful in supporting the child.
I mean, I'm seeing a question in the chat. How is this work aligning with ADA guidance on expulsions in childcare?
So I'm not an expert on ADA. That's my caveat, but it aligns well, because it is, unless they're like, Renee, I'm wondering if there's a piece of your question that I'm not thinking about. A lot of children are suspended or expelled because of a disability or perceived disability. And so we're really trying to provide those supports to prevent that.
Yeah, one of my question, actually, it's been brewing since Preschool Promise was launched, that there are situations where it's not safe for other children, for a child to be in care. And the Americans with Disabilities Act addresses reasonable accommodation. And I have failed to see that language woven into Preschool Promise guidance. And I am hopeful that as this is rolling out, that we are acknowledging the federal guidance related to childcare. And so we're not in conflict with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I would just encourage folks to be crosswalking that guidance with whatever the final product is here. So we aren't, number one, confusing people, and number two, providing as much clarity for ourselves as we are providing guidance for folks as we can, and that we're all on the same page and the page is comprehensive.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for calling that out.
And I would just note that ADA accommodations and reasonable accommodations are the minimum. They're the federal law. States having an additional requirement or additional regulations can be on top of that. And so I do think, though, Renee, your point about making sure we're aligned and the messaging is consistent is going to be important.
All right. I'm seeing some activity in the chat. What I am wondering about is whether to take time to respond to these now, or if what we want to do is share a little bit of information on mental health consultation, and then save the questions to talk about in our breakout groups. Nancy and Maria, I'll look to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes before we go into breakout groups. So gosh, I want to do both. So let's go through the next couple of slides and see where we are before we go into breakout groups.
Okay, that sounds great. So I am going to turn it over. I'm not sure if I'm turning it over to Erin or to Nicole.
I think Nicole. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. I'm Nicole Parody, and I like to talk about infant and early childhood mental health. So we really wanted to make sure we have some common understandings across the board about what infant and early childhood mental health consultation actually is. It can be a little confusing to those who are uninitiated, and it can be a little confusing to people who are within the field as well, I will note. So for the sake of trying to get on the same page here, it feels really important to make sure folks know that mental health consultation is an indirect service. So this is not about providing therapy to the child. This is about providing support that is informed by infant and early childhood mental health principles, but support that goes to the care providers themselves. So it's not for the children, it's for the adults who are supporting the children. Another big important piece about mental health consultation, or infant and early childhood mental health consultation specifically, is that it is grounded in equity principles. This really is intended to be a force for social justice, and that the competencies that are required of those who carry out mental health consultation include things like really being able to have complicated conversations about race, about bias, about having space and support to acknowledge and address bias that may be and one of the elements of concern. So next slide. So again, just to sort of clarify what it is and what it isn't, I said, as I said, it's not therapy or any kind of direct intervention with the infant or young child themselves, nor is it therapy for the providers themselves. It can be, hopefully, somewhat therapeutic for the providers. We really want this to be a care for the caregivers, but it is not therapy for the providers. As I mentioned before, it is in fact an indirect service aimed at the adults. It is also not a mental health intervention. I like to think about it as, sometimes I say mental health consultation, but really I think the better way to frame it is it's consultation that supports infant and early childhood mental health, right? We want the infants and young children in care. We want their social emotional development to be nurtured, to be enhanced, to be grown and supported. And so really that's what this consultation is about. How do we understand what the relational needs are of infants and young children, and then offer the kind of support that providers need in order to really promote that. So it is, in terms of the going back to what it is not, it certainly does include some of the strategies from coaching, but it is different than. It is a distinct service from coaching. One very important thing to acknowledge is that it's not a quick fix, and it is not the only strategy necessary to address some of the crises that early care and education providers are facing. However, there is research to indicate that it is effective in improving child outcomes in terms of social emotional well-being and provider outcomes in terms of the way that they provide that support to the children. And there's some evidence also to indicate that there are programmatic changes that are positive as a result of being involved with an infant and early childhood mental health consultant. It is not a prescribed or manualized intervention, but there are competencies that are required. There are frameworks that are applied, but there's enough flexibility so that regions and communities can adapt the model to meet their needs. Next slide. And this is just a quick visualization. Really what's at the heart of this is that what we want is for babies, young children, and families to be held and seen and heard and valued. And that means their care providers need to receive the same thing. So that's the hope, is that mental health consultants will be there to really help the care providers feel seen, heard, valued, regulated, that their reflective capacities are strengthened. But we know that mental health consultants need the same thing as well. And so that's for in this project where the regional service providers come in. And then I'm a part of the ARIMHA team. And so ARIMHA, as the central entity for this project, has the role of supporting the regional service providers. So you can see this is just this big network of trying to make sure that nobody is pouring from an empty cup, that everyone up and down here is pouring from a full cup, so that we have much better supported care providers and babies, young children, and families.
All
So,
right.
before we go into the program branding, let's answer the questions in the chat. I think it started with Begonia.
Yes. Let me.
Do you want me to read it?
Sure, that would be lovely.
Do our regional partners have the most updated baseline of children's behavioral health providers? And if so, do you have a breakdown by languages? Do we even have enough workforce to deal with the amount of referrals now and in 2026?
A fantastic question. There's a lot in that question. So in terms of a baseline of children's behavioral health providers, I don't know if anybody has that information, but it is something it's something that will be important to kind of develop and gather, and to work with our partners at OHA on. I would say the regional partners don't have that right now. In terms of workforce, Erin or Nicole, I wonder if you would want to talk briefly about how we're conceptualizing the mental health consultation workforce specifically.
Nicole, is it okay if I jump in? And then jump in as well. I was busy putting some citations in the chat. But I think we're really thinking about the consultant workforce broadly. So certainly we have regional service providers, and there will be, is it 16 or 17 of them, Katrina, in the end, right around that number, regionally available. But we also are thinking broadly in terms of early intervention and how in early childhood special education, and how we can think about peripherally some of that as our workforce. We're thinking about the pyramid model and consultants who are trained to do good behavioral management, and how is that part of the workforce, even if they're not one of this designated regional service providers. We're really trying to think across systems for all the different initiatives that are happening. And then, of course, thinking about strategies for training that broad workforce in terms of promotion, prevention, and intervention with infant and early childhood mental health concerns, issues, those kinds of things. So did that help, Katrina?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll ask the group if that helped, but we're really looking at multiple pathways in and supporting people to grow and develop the skills. Recognizing, yeah, there is part of the work of growing this program is growing and expanding the workforce.
And I think I might have mentioned this to this group, and if I haven't, I will now again. And Nicole, feel free to jump in. But ARIMHA recently became a sponsoring organization for the registry. So we will be tying the trainings that we develop and sort of looking at what's offered through that system to make sure our trainings are aligned and help people move up that career ladder. So again, thinking really broadly about who the workforce is. And we feel like it's not just the consultants that might provide some supports, but it's also the teachers, the assistant teachers, in terms of the promotion and prevention piece as well.
I'll just quickly add, I think you sort of said this, Erin, but just to emphasize it, that ARIMHA has a much broader role in the state as well in terms of supporting everyone in every sector of the workforce who's working with or on behalf of infants, young children, and families. And so is already doing a lot to grow the capacity of people who can work in each of those sectors from an infant and early childhood mental health informed lens.
Scrolling down, and I saw a question from Sarah, and now I've lost it. Sarah, can you just read your question?
I mean, I have some curiosity about putting regulation on private business is the punchline.
Yes. I mean, I'll see if Alicia wants to add anything, but private businesses who are caring for children already have other restrictions on what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do. So this is a newer restriction, but it's not out of alignment with what it means to take care of young people as a private business.
I mean, I agree in a sense. Of course, there's the child care division rules that have rules and regulations around health and safety and square footage and the types of materials that are available in the classroom. But I feel like we're entering new territory. And I know the department and the state is really risk adverse. And so I'm sure you all are thinking about those pieces of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is also, it's important to recognize that the Prohibition Senate Bill 236 was something that was really community-led, community-driven. And that is what led to the prohibition on suspension and expulsion. So DELC is really in the place of honoring the work that went into that and ultimately the law that is now in place. and we're doing our best to prepare to support everybody in that process.
I'll also jump in and add that while I definitely hear you, Sarah, that like on the surface for childcare licensing, like this really leans kind of more into practices, right? Like that almost lean into quality. But I will also say that it is a national trend and a national conversation and a call to action in many white papers or national guidance or research out there that licensing should address suspension and expulsion, because this does relate to mental health of children, supporting mental health of families, keeping children in quality care spaces is not only good for the child, but it's also good for the family. And it can also be an indicator and like a what's the word I'm looking for? A preventer to abuse and neglect situations, right? And so there's lots of evidence out there that keeping kids in stable care is actually really beneficial for their health and for the health of the family. And so I think, while it is going to be a challenge to implement. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat that. There's a lot of feelings around this approach, but in CCLD, that is the reason why we're hoping to take a technical assistance approach and let people know that we're here to get them the resources they need to keep the kids in care. And, that ultimately, that's what we think is best for kids. And we don't want to take an enforcement approach where providers are going to be fearful of the fact that they may have broken a rule. And I would say that's the case that I like to take for most of the rules in CCLD, barring the, of course, the boundaries that we have related to if you are harming a child, right? And so I hope that's helpful. I can drop in a link to some resources that I have that point to this being kind of a broader national conversation related to putting suspension and expulsion regulations into childcare licensing. But I do understand that, these are tough conversations we're going to have and we're having now, and we're going to continue to have to make sure the system works well.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I know this is a conversation that's happening at the Early Learning Council as well. And so I do think we want to be armed with answers and responses to this, both at that executive level and then on the ground, when I think there's going to be unintended consequences where we're going to see providers pulling out.
We may. And if that's the case, then we'll figure out what our next strategy is. There are some things that we can wonder about and think, predict. And yeah, I don't know what to say about it. Like it could happen, and if it does, we'll problem solve and keep moving forward. I see Patty.
I think it makes sense to just continue in the large group since there's so many questions, and then we can, before our time is up, we can do the Menti with the program branding. Does that sound good to you and your team?
That works for me. Does that work for the rest of the group?
Was that a yes?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, all right. So I wanted to take one more question from the chat, and then we've got some hands that are raised. Let's see, Renee, do you want to ask about this is the language I was hoping to see?
Yeah, what Alicia posted there was exactly what is aligned with the ADA guidance on childcare. And the only thing I would note is that language should be overshared, in my opinion, so that providers really understand all of their roles, responsibilities, and what's reasonable accommodation. And so I think just oversharing that in all of the documents, preschool promise, the suspension and expulsion guidance, all of it should be echoing the same language.
Begonia and then Patty. Begonia, do you want to read your question?
Sorry, I was scrolling up. And yes, so my question is, you mentioned that there is no just one way of support, but there's like different approaches or tiers. But my concern is special ed has experienced like significant budget cuts that is making all of us very nervous and really worried about this thing. And then, yes, we are happy to launch the pyramid model leadership team in our county, but there's no funding behind that thing. So this is something that we do in a blended and braided approach. And that thing means a lot of things, as you know, right? Not necessarily money, but without teeth behind these things, if we don't grow special ed, or the funding doesn't get restored, or we expand the funding and there's no funding behind the pyramid model, and if there is not a really creative plan around how to increase the workforce for behavioral health and mental health. So what is the plan? And I didn't see as part of the priorities for investments for this year anything related to supporting the pyramid model or suspension and expulsion. I don't think that I've seen anything with real teeth. And July 2026 is really around the corner. So I think that at this point, everybody is very stressed out around this thing. So do we have positive news about funding for this coming year or by 2026, and something that we can be growing between now and then?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'm sure funding is something that is on the minds of all of us. So sort of a two-part answer. One is the first part of the answer is the budget for the infant and early childhood mental health consultation. Some of the other pieces around it is embedded as part of the DELC like ongoing budget. So we're expecting the funding that we've had in the current biennium to continue into the next biennium. So we have that baseline. In terms of expansion or growth, all of that is, I mean, all state agencies have been limited to a small request and increase, as you know, and so we're in that same situation where this is one of those places where I really wish I had the proverbial magic wand to come up with more funds, because we do want to support more pyramid model funding. We do want to expand the mental health consultation. We definitely need our EI-ECSE system to be funded. And yeah, we'll make the best of the funds that we have, and we'll keep working to find more. And I'm going to see if John wants to jump in and add anything to that.
I raised my hand because I didn't want to jump over poor Patty, who'd been waiting for so long to speak. But I will say, yeah, there's a few unknowns. There might be possibilities for additional investments, but we'll see how the economic forecast goes and what the governor's budget turns out to be, and then we'll make plans from there. But I think you hit it, Katrina. And then if after the folks who have their hands up, I wanted to say something about the subject around what happens if we have lawsuits and things of that nature. I just have an additional thought related to that, but I think there's some burning questions. So
Thanks, John.
dying for Patty to have a chance to speak.
Patty?
Oh, that makes me sound so desperate, John. Thanks. I just wanted to piggyback on what Begonia had said. EI-ECSE is going to be one of our most valuable partners when we're doing this work. My background is in mental health and EI-ECSE, and so when we're talking about behaviors, that doesn't usually fall into the category of EIECSE. It is very difficult to get a child qualified on an IFSP for behavior alone. They usually have to have a coexisting speech or language or other difficulty to do that. And when you're talking about behavioral kids, those are the ones that are usually blowing out of the classroom. Those are the ones that, that are very difficult to manage without one-on-one situations. So I think it's really important that we keep that partnership with EIECSE in the forefront of our mind. And as an early learning hub director, we have done such a great job as hubs with early identification and ASQs for kids and getting kids screened within the first 45 days, of entering in a program. And, we are identifying a lot of kids earlier, but we're also just seeing a lot more kids in need of services. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's hard for behavioral kids to get help through EIECSE, and you can refer a kid in, let's say, 1st of October, end of September, but it might be till the end of January or February where we're actually making a determination on whether that child is going to even qualify for services or a one-on-one. And that's what they usually need in the classroom. So helping teachers with that is really a good idea and all the resources, but workforce, again, is one of the things I think we really have to consider.
Really appreciate that, Patty. Thank you. Evan, Renee, and then I see Athena's got a comment in the chat.
Yeah, I'll start with a concern and then end with a glimmer of hope, maybe. I think the concern is we talk about the variety of supports that could be offered and how some of them are in kind of infantile states and some are underfunded, but then you don't have to look that far to see how this plays out in the K-12 sector. And their response has often been, you think about a place that has a lot of the structural things that we're talking about putting into place, and yet their workforce is struggling. And they have the option of implementing things like instructional aids, which has often become the go-to option. And that's not going to be a viable pathway for early childhood providers. So I think that's a concern, is just the reality of, you're talking about potentially needing more bodies in the room to really address some of these issues. And then my hopeful message would be an opportunity to, we're doing it locally, but I think it's a state conversation that needs to occur between maybe the governor's office, Alyssa, Delk's leadership team, and OHA about how to sell infant mental health consultation and the pyramid model as a preventative measure that could be tied into the social emotional metric and some of the other investments that OHA has said that they want to make and that the CCOs are moving forward with. I think, the timing didn't work out to line up that measure because the bench takes so long. But I think, yeah, Susan, exactly, like in lieu of services, looking at some of that stuff, and we can have these conversations locally and we can have some small wins. But I think in the meantime, we need to be having a state conversation about how to blend some of these activities. So that's my hope, is that we can get some traction in that space and move forward maybe over the next couple of years to make it more, and to have some more permanent fixtures outside of just the legislative funding part of it.
Thanks, Evan. Renee, and then Athena.
Mine is similar to Evan's comment. It was more of a question, though, wondering if Delk currently has a strategy to raise funding to do some of these things. And if we're waiting for the legislature to get on board with this prevention that is so critical, these kids are going to graduate from high school before that happens, right? We don't want that to happen. And so I'm wondering what kind of strategies beyond state funding investment Delk might be looking at to get this work moving forward.
I don't know that I am in the know on that particular thing, I'm going to turn to John.
I think it's an interesting question, Renee. I mean, you're talking about a government system, and we've got a certain amount of levers. The levers of drawing in funding outside of those structures are no different necessarily than a local regional partner trying to apply for temporary funding. I mean, there's not a lot of other sources to go out and get. I'd love to hear your thoughts about maybe what you were thinking behind that, or if you were just wondering why we
No,
or what we're
it wasn't a
thinking.
setup question at all. So what I'm thinking is, as like my region, as we are looking, like since I think October, our region has raised over $1 million to go towards the childcare crisis, some of it for behavioral health. And that's just one region because I happen to have 7 people on my team. We have some time and some bandwidth to do that. What would it look like if DELC were to be engaging Oregon's philanthropic community rather than each of us hub directors reaching out to philanthropy or other partners to engage? What would it look like if DELC were to engage the state conversation in a way that is, ensuring that every region gets the access they need, regardless of whether they have enough FTE to seek out additional funding. And grant funding obviously is limited duration, and there would be business engagement and lots of other strategies that could be more ongoing. But it just feels like with this kind of a statewide effort without a statewide plan to fund it, I just think that needs to be part of the conversation at the same time. And I would be happy to be in any of those conversations. So that's my
I appreciate that, the way you verbalize that, Renee. I mean, I think that there's a lot that DELC could be doing to bring partners together that do have funding resources and think out towards, how can we build a system that supports what we're all trying to achieve. I think the thing that Evan brought up around OHA and other partners, I mean, I think that's another one of those same types of conversations and levers. And I do want to say, and this may not be a popular statement, but providers are out there right now with no support doing this. I shouldn't say no support, with limited support, doing this by themselves. And we're installing additional resources. And we have to see how those resources work to help them. But with or without the current resources that we have coming online, they're doing it already every day. And we also go from our, from each of these scenarios, we jump to the worst case scenario because those scenarios do exist. But I want to remind us that with support, with providers having access to people who can walk alongside them and support them in their environments, a lot of those situations can be de-escalated. And then the situations where we have, real legitimate concerns about whether a child should be in that environment or not, one of the things that we'll be doing as we move into that next set of rule set engagement is creating a definition around what a planned transition is. And so it kind of goes to what you were saying, Renee, around reasonable accommodation. It'll be more like you've engaged in all of these resources. There's a community around this provider trying to support them. The resources and the people that are a part of that are all now suggesting that, and the family's saying this isn't working out. And so then what? And so a planned transition would be where, are we working and able to find another location for the child to be? We know that's challenging also, but we want this there has to be a trajectory to have a conversation about, is this the right fit? Because it could be that it's just the absolute wrong program for that child and that child's needs. And so I want us to keep thinking about the worst case scenarios because they're out there, but I also think that the resources that are coming online are going to be supportive to providers and not leave them in, completely without options. And I think, a lot can be done if people are utilizing preventative approaches like pyramid model and and then to have people come in and support them. And I know there was somebody else waiting to talk, and
Yes, thanks,
talked over
John.
them. Sorry, Nancy.
That's okay. No, it's good information. Athena, and then I wanted to hear from Rod. I've seen you making some interesting comments in the chat. So Athena?
Thank you. I just wanted to bring attention to like listening to some of the prevention and planned movements and things like that. In geographically isolated areas, like many of us have, sometimes that's the only provider within an hour. Sometimes there's not another option, and what we're seeing is that there aren't behavioral health specialists. So if a child needs behavioral health interventions, um, it's great to provide consultation to the provider. And when we have a 6 to 12-month wait for mental health, behavioral health providers for anybody, and even more for children, and many that don't provide any sort of supports for under 5, that becomes a real concern, in that there's not additional immediate interventions that are being provided. A lot of our providers, our CCR&R is great about having cohorts and providing coaching and providing supports as best they can, and EIECSC does everything they can. But when you have to have 2 different ways of getting involved in the program, and behavioral sports isn't necessarily one of those, it becomes a real challenge where what we've heard from some providers is, okay, I'm already receiving consultation and support, so how do I have immediate interventions where when all of my tools and all of the consultation I've received isn't effective, then what? And it feels like the answer is right now, keep doing what you're doing. And that's a real struggle to, especially when, somebody may not even have, other than a CCR&R rep or somebody that's coming in from a cohort or whatnot, they may not have anybody near them to transition a kiddo to or to receive additional support from. And so I just want to be really keeping some of those providers that are very isolated in mind as we're looking at this planning process as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Athena. There are a lot of rural and remote areas across Oregon, and that's, thinking about those dynamics is really important in the planning process, as that DELC is engaged in the planning process that regional service providers are engaged in. But I want to also kind of take it to that bigger, wider systems level that goes beyond the hubs, beyond the regional service providers, beyond a RIMHOP, beyond DELC, and to really think about and other people have mentioned this too, our partners at ODE and EIECSE, and our partners at OHA. And what does it mean to create a system that really can support sort of the whole child and the whole family, so that it is about supporting the child in their early education placement and supporting the provider to support the child and workplace well-being. And that child and that provider exist outside of that program. There's a home and a community, and that community may be urban or it may be very remote. And so what does that mean in terms of physical health, behavioral health, access to behavioral health supports? So Erin Knabe-Wennerstrom and I we're part of a committee together with a few people from early intervention. It's both with early intervention, OHA. There's a representative from ODHS, Child Welfare. There are multiple ones of us that sit on the Oregon Early Childhood Inclusion Initiative and participate there. And so we're in active conversations with ODE. OHA is also at that table. We're planning additional conversation and outreach, but ultimately that's also a job. So DELC is doing and will be doing what we can, and it's also one of those jobs that belongs to all of us in the system, is to think about how do we further engage those our other state partners in this work and in creating the plans.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and Katrina, Marie, and I promised that you'd be able to do your Menti poll. I'm just going to make sure that if Rod had any outstanding questions, I know he had some questions in there about pyramid model and different roles. Rod?
Oh, the main thing in there was this role of the infant and early childhood mental health consultant, if that could, especially in our spread out region, if that person's role could partially be as a pyramid model implementation coach to programs, because we have gone quite a ways down the road with community-wide implementation, and that is definitely a place where we find zero funding, you know, and it's an important piece when you're trying to implement pyramid model to have that coach alongside a program. And I don't know, we're really trying to take that preventative approach and let everything else fall where it's going to fall. Locally, we're just trying to be involved in what we can control right now. So
absolutely,
but we have looked at that ESAP as possibly a kind of a dual role, mental health consultant and a implementation coach. So
let's have more conversation around that idea. It's there's some nuances, like there's a lot of alignment, and then there's some nuances, and we also want to, this is the first time that most of the state will have had access to mental health consultation. And so we also want to make sure that we're not diluting the effectiveness of it, if you will. Not to say that pyramid model dilutes the effectiveness. That's not what I mean at all. I'm a huge fan of pyramid model. But I think it just deserves a really thoughtful conversation.
And I just want to underscore how many members of the DELC team are part of the leadership team for Pyramid or the Inclusion Initiative. So there is a lot of thought at that level, and perhaps another venue for conversation, but I appreciate that creative thinking.
Thanks, everybody. There's still some questions, but let's move on to the program branding. Katrina?
Thanks, Nancy. So one of the things that you no doubt have noticed is that when you say early childhood suspension and expulsion prevention program, it's a mouthful. And it's also not a friendly acronym. Some people say it ESEP, some people say it EXEP, some people spell it out ECSEPP. It's just not a really super user-friendly name. So what we're doing is we're in the process of really thinking about how do we want to represent this program? What is another name that kind of represents what we're aiming for? Suspension and expulsion prevention says, oh, Danny likes ESEP. So, so we have a poll, which will, these are the three names that are under discussion. So Every Child Belongs, Early Childhood Belonging and Care Network, or Keeping Children in Care. And oh, interesting. Okay. So hopefully this Mentimeter, this what do you call it? QR code, that's what it's called, will work for you. let me know if anybody's having trouble with that. Whoops. Speaking of pyramid model. Let me find. Okay, I have to take my screen down for a minute in order to find the, it's hiding behind the. Oh, I would also say, oh, uh-oh, it didn't work, did it? Are people having trouble getting in? Yeah. Okay, some people are, could not open it.
Oh, I got in. I voted.
Okay. It is telling me that the participant limit is reached. Although it also looks like a few people are still being able to enter something. So let's give it just a minute.
While we're giving it a minute, I just want to make sure everybody saw some of the great resources that Arimha and Del put in the chat based on all the questions. I think Marie and I can probably try and collect all of that when we send a follow-up email.
Okay, let me show you the results as we have them. Although I think it tells me it maxed out, so this probably didn't catch everybody. So I realize that's probably very small on your screen. This one here says that Every Child Belongs with 8 votes. The second one is Early Childhood Belonging and Care Network with 2, and Keeping Kids in Care has 1 vote. So anybody, let's say anybody that the Menti didn't work for, if you want to put it in the chat, you can message it to the whole group or to me directly, and we'll capture your vote that way.
When will you decide on the name? What's the timing for this?
Very soon, I believe before the end of this month. I think we're getting close. We've shared this with the advisory committee. We've shared this with CCRNR directors. We've shared this with regional service providers, and we shared this with a group of community members who gathered at the end of September. So we're very close. I will say it has been very consistent that that this one, Every Child Belongs, is by far the favorite. I'm getting a couple messages that are also votes for Every Child Belongs.
I think with that wraps us up. We've got 2 minutes left. Thank you so much to the DELC and the Arimha team for this really wonderful opportunity to learn more about this huge body of work, and for everyone's engagement, and for voting on a name.
Yes.
Maria just dropped in the chat our hub meeting exit survey. Any questions that weren't answered? Any questions or concerns about the meeting? Anything at all? Maria and I really appreciate getting your feedback. Maria, anything else?
I think that'll do it. Just a quick reminder for the KPI peer learning tomorrow morning. And we thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.